Hello, podcast listeners. Two brief announcements before this week's podcast. First announcement, about this episode. Holiday schedules being what they are, we didn't do a lot of prep for this one. We essentially made a vague plan about what we wanted to cover, and then sat in front of the mics and talked for a few hours. So while we had a great time, what we ended up recording was kind of long, kind of rambly, and just generally not good radio. Rather than subject you to that, I'm cutting out a selection of some of the most interesting parts and splicing them together into a Frankenstein-esque creation that I hope in some way resembles an entertaining podcast. I apologize in advance for any continuity errors and nonsensical callbacks that make their way into the final product. Also, we're scattering back to our respective homelands and going into hibernation for the next 2 weeks, so this will be the last podcast of the year. But you can expect us back with regular updates in January. That's it for the announcements, so without further ado, here's the Gauntlet Episode 2, powered by the Apocalypse.
Gauntlet Podcast, episode number 2, powered by the Apocalypse. My name is Jason.
My name is Steve.
My name is Dan.
Cool. Well, before we get going talking about the main topic, as always, why don't we start with the games we played last week? Who wants to get started? Steve?
So, let me see. So, first off, I played Friday night, went to a friend's place and played Love Letter with my friends, but also with their kids, notably. One, I think, 9 and one 5-ish. And so I expected, especially the young one, They love games, so that wasn't the objection I was expecting. When I come over, I always bring something or other. But I was expecting the 5-year-old to sort of get bored/confused by the complexity of Love Letter and,
Should we back up and say what Love Letter is?
Love Letter is a very quick and simple but elegant card game by Japanese designer Seiji Kanai. And there's a little bit of guesswork, a little bit of hidden roles, a little bit of incomplete information, all work together nicely. But, so the kids loved it, and I saw some really advanced play from the 5-year-old, which was bizarre. But every time we'd finish a round, the 5-year-old would be like, more, again. So, Love Letter, a hit with kids.
So does that reflect well or poorly on a game that you can get dominated at by 5-year-olds?
I'm not sure, but the fact that I had fun the whole time definitely reflects well on it.
All right, that's fair.
I also played Love Letter this week. I played it on Tuesday. Sometimes after we're done playing the Pathfinder card game, we'll bust out Love Letter. I would like to point out that I've been playing it wrong for about a year and a half now. I've probably played Love Letter almost countless numbers of times, right? And I've been playing it wrong. I'm not going to say how I've been playing it wrong, but I discovered how I'm playing it wrong, and the game is even better now. I loved it before, and I really love it now that I'm playing it according to the rules. So, no, it's a good time. Good little deduction game. I like it a lot. What else did you play this week?
I think the only other thing I played was Cthulhu Dark Sunday. Do we want to wait on that one?
Yeah, we should wait on that.
Yeah,
because all three of us played in that. Well, so on Tuesday, I played the Pathfinder Adventure card game. I've already said everything I've wanted to say about that, except to say that it's no good, but it's very fun. So, Dan, do you want to kind of go into Wednesday?
Sure. So Wednesday was, I guess, the first real session of our Monsterhearts campaign.
Right.
So last week, we kind of set everything up, figured out who we were, who all of the kids in our homeroom were, all of that. I guess Monsterhearts, real quick, it is, how would you describe it?
It is a game about the messy lives of sexy teenage monsters.
There you go. So it's Twilight, the RPG.
Yeah, well, I actually don't like that comparison. I don't like that. I don't like that Twilight the RPG thing.
It's not inaccurate, but it does it.
Yeah, I don't like it. I mean, because there are lots of different types of monsters, and you can explore all kinds of different themes that Twilight was nowhere near exploring. And also, Twilight is quite chaste, right?
Yeah,
as far as
that's true. Yeah.
It's quite chaste, and Monsterhearts is not.
It doesn't have to be a Mormon allegory.
Right. Monsterhearts not written by a Mormon, clearly.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. If you're a Mormon and you're offended by that, please write in. So but I guess the sort of easy comparison that you can kind of, a quick sort of cultural touchstone type comparison you can make is, yes, it's like Twilight, I suppose. But it also has, the characters have explicit sex moves. Like, sex is a big part of it, right? So it doesn't have the same, like, chastity.
Though I hear sex gets really involved in the end of the Twilight trilogy. I don't know. I've never read it, but I hear there's weird sex shit happening all over the end of that series.
She just kind of unleashed it all, like all this pent up sexual tension. Just
well, they're married by then, so it's okay.
That's true.
Oh, you can be as freaky as you want once you put a ring on it, I guess, right? Well, so do you want to say anything else about the game that we played? I mean, it was I ran that game just so the listeners know. It was terrific, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it as a player.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that in general, Monsterhearts is kind of quickly
becoming my favorite game. I feel like every time I play it, I think this game is pretty fucking amazing.
It's really good. Yeah.
And then I forget about it and go on to other things, and I'm like, I don't know. I guess Monsterhearts was all right, but every time I play it again, man, I realize why I love that game so much.
It always kind of, I can see where you're going with that, because we play lots of different games in the Gauntlet. So for people who might be joining us for the first time, the Gauntlet is Houston's premier role-playing game club. We game numerous times a week, and we play lots and lots of different games, particularly story and indie games. I always want to go back to Monsterhearts, though. I really do. I'm not going to say it's my favorite role-playing game. That's actually the final girl. But I'll just be sitting in my room and thinking, man, I really want to play Monsterhearts right now. I don't know what it is about it, but the characters are so interesting. The mechanics are great. It's a little bit related to the topic, so I'll kind of save some of that, I think. But
you guys are just making me feel really bad that I can't make Wednesdays.
Yeah, you'd like it. Yeah,
that's helping. Thanks.
Yeah, and when we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do on Wednesdays, we were going for a longer term campaign, and you brought up the idea of playing Monsterhearts, and I was kind of like, well, I don't know, because I've played Monsterhearts a couple times, and I always feel like I've just gotten everything I'm going to get out of that game.
Right, yeah.
When I've already played a game a number of times, but man,
you can always
something different and more twisted every time.
You can always wring more out of it. I mean, like, I think people probably, I'm sure you guys probably wonder if, like, I'm sick of playing Dungeon World, for example, and I'm not. Like, every time I play Dungeon World, every new campaign or every new thing that we start reinvigorates me anew. Like, I like it. I just love that game. And Monsterhearts is a very similar thing. The skins are what they are, the rules are what they are, and they're great, but they just create this tremendous framework for making amazing stories, and that's kind of what it comes down to for me, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I really think that the stories that you make in Monsterhearts are in a genre that I'm not necessarily super familiar with, and so I feel like I can get more out of Monsterhearts than I can out of something like DW, where it's just like, now we're going to tell another fantasy story.
Right, yeah. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
So. That's totally fair. I never get tired of elves and shit. I love elves and I love dragons. So. I'm not ashamed to say so. Well, so another game that I played this week was a video game called Velocity 2X. I wanted to mention that one because it was included in my PlayStation Plus subscription as a free game. I would have probably not known about this game otherwise. It's kind of a smaller indie game, and I gather it's a sequel to a game called Velocity.
That makes sense.
It does indeed, yeah. They went straight to 2X, which I thought was interesting, instead of just 2. I want to bring it up just because it is a smaller game, and we can help signal boost it to our tens and tens of listeners. For whom I'm kidding. No, it's great. So basically, Velocity 2X is this Twitch like shooter game, except it kind of puts an interesting little spin on the shooter genre. And that part of, like, when I say shooter, I mean like shoot 'em up, like your little spaceship is flying around shooting things. It has this little neat twist whereby you're doing all that, but then occasionally you like pull into these little docks and it turns into a side scroller. So you're like running through these little side scrolling mazes, and then you have to jump back in your ship and then go and then doing the top down, shooter bit. It's really, really cool. The gameplay really emphasizes like doing a perfect run. So you are trying to fly through the level and collect every single thing and shoot every single enemy and hit every little bit in a short amount of time. And it's really, really addictive. Like if you're really into like Twitch addictive gameplay, it's pretty awesome. I have not been able to stop playing it. I can't wait for this to be over so I can go back and play it.
That sounds like the worst game.
No, it is so good. I love it. Go play Velocity 2X. And then the only other thing I played this week is Cthulhu Dark, which all three of us played. So why don't we spend some time on Cthulhu Dark? Steve, you want to kind of set it up for us, just in terms of what it is?
Yeah. So Cthulhu Dark is sort of a response to aging, venerable, old, reliable Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
And it's written by Graham Walmsley, and it's extremely short. I think the shortest version is like 1 page or 2
Yeah, it's about a page.
tops.
Yeah, page is generous. Yeah. Like you could fit all those instructions on an index card, really, if you tried.
It's super simple, and he mentions in the rules that it was basically designed to play Call of Cthulhu scenarios.
Right.
And I took that probably a bit too much to heart, but I'm skipping ahead a bit. But it's basically a very simple system designed to get people who know nothing about Call of Cthulhu's rules quickly into a game. There we go.
Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit in the actual day that we played, and we had 2 different tables, and it seemed like I had a different experience than you guys did with the game, because you guys left it not being pleased with it, and I left being really, really pleased with it. Like, I loved it. So
I should clarify. Like, I left basically being pleased with the system, and I think I just screwed the pooch. And so I went with a scenario. I'd never done a improv horror type of game. Or
sure, yeah.
So I went with a scenario. I like trusted the text, I guess.
Right.
But that wasn't really my mistake. It may have still ended up bad, but I went with an especially weird scenario.
Oh, yeah.
So that the system didn't quite work for the bizarre requirements of the scenario I picked.
Okay.
Which
and the
was,
scenario was originally for Trail of Cthulhu, right? Or was
Oh
it
no,
called,
it was
Call?
It's a Call of Cthulhu
Okay.
convention scenario.
Oh, okay, I see.
But it had bizarre characters, some of which are it's called My Overcrowded Pineal Gland by Gareth Hanrahan for the
That's a good name. That's a good name.
Yeah.
I have to say. That's a good name.
and it reads great. And it may even play great in Call of Cthulhu. I don't know, but it sort of required 3 of the potential PCs were voices in the head of another potential PC. So they all share the same like sanity track, and one of those voices in the head is named Sanity, and so any damage to Sanity is physical damage to that character.
Wow!
And I really should have interpreted this as warning bells and voices, but I did not, to my discredit. And so I left though pretty much pleased with the potential of the system.
Okay, yeah,
because I was a little bit worried that the mechanic. There's a mechanic in the system where, in order to do something where the outcome is uncertain or the level of success is uncertain,
right?
Whichever player is rolling picks up a die or a few dice and rolls, and it's just by default a success no matter what you roll.
Yeah, you always win no matter what. Yeah,
but
unless
anyone at the table
right.
can, in response to one of those rolls, decide that basically they want X to happen, where X is some interesting variety of failure.
Right. Yeah,
and frequently that will end up being the GM, but I was a little worried that...
Oh, see, I didn't even know the GM could. I had the other players be the challengers. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I was doing that wrong, but I mean, it didn't affect our play at all. But I
wouldn't actually say it's wrong because there's like a brief paragraph at the end of the rule system, which is like unanswered questions. Who sets up opposition for a roll?
Oh, okay, all right.
But I was sort of worried that it would tend to go especially wacky, but the scenario itself was probably wacky enough that it's tough to top.
And well, so as a player in that, I felt like it was real hard to come up with things that would be like a good thing for like, hey, this is how this goes wrong, that wouldn't completely bone the entire scenario. I mean, it was obviously like a module where we were supposed to be going to these places and like this is the order that this is supposed to happen, which is one of the big problems I have with general Trail of Cthulhu and games like that. And so like it sort of hands power over to the players, but then as a player I was very unsure of what I was supposed to be doing with that, because I didn't want to be like, hey, guess what, now everything's fucked and we're never going to be able to solve this mystery.
I've been on your side of that dynamic before, and it really bugs the crap out of me. So that
so like sense. Trying to give power to players when they don't have access to the story really like it's a strange mix.
And when there isn't a story in air quotes, then that works fine.
Right.
You're collaboratively creating it.
Right.
But since I went with a rather elaborate module,
it sounds ornate.
Didn't quite know how to drift the thing. It ended up being a problem.
And it made a real cardinal sin, I thought, of, well, there's a lot of secrets at the table, right? Initially. So you get your backstory of like, hey, this is what your character is. And one of the players has a secret that they really need to play up, or you're just not going to get it at the end. And none of us really grokked what we were supposed to get out of it. And so it was like, well, we got to the end and we fucked everything up. So
and that was, again, I wouldn't put that on the player. I would actually put that again on my decision to go with this.
I would put it on the scenario itself of trying to accomplish things that don't work well in role playing games in general.
Well, they certainly don't work well when there's a sizable dissonance between the module designed for System A and the conversion to System B. In other words, like every time anyone in that guy's head or that guy tried to use the psychic powers, there's supposed to be a sanity roll in normal Call of Cthulhu, or like you lose a sanity point or something. And I should have just ignored that and gone with description, but I was having you guys roll, and there's like 2 or 3 characters who are all sort of sharing the same sanity track, and so I was enforcing rolls, and the character playing the psyche basically at a certain point I think realized, okay, this character's gonna, we're all gonna lose our sanity basically if I persist.
Right. Yeah.
So she couldn't really play it up.
Right.
Well, so for my table, I was the GM at my table, or the keeper at my table. I created my own scenario. I did so using a supplement that Graham Walmsley published for Cthulhu Dark called Dark Depths. And Dark Depths was essentially a series of instructions, like a flowchart almost, of how to create a Cthulhu or Lovecraftian mystery that goes well with Cthulhu Dark. And I think you could actually use the created mystery for probably any Call of Cthulhu type system.
Yeah.
And mine, it worked really well. I did a very traditional sort of scenario. That Dark Depths document tends to produce those kinds of scenarios, I have to imagine, based off the types of questions. But essentially there was a town that has witnessed lots of various like strange supernatural phenomenon and occult activity. There's a person who went missing, and the people who have the investigators have shown up to they were either there to investigate the occult or the supernatural occurrences of the town, or they were there to investigate the disappearance of this NPC. And it worked really well. It was a very, very traditional, straight down the line, sort of like Cthulhu type, Cthulhu mythos story. And it worked. I was quite pleased with it. One of the things that I think was really great about it versus some of these modules, I had spent most of the prior day just looking at modules that I was to use to run for my table before I just got totally frustrated with it and gave up. Is the modules are very railroady, right? Like there's a sequence of events you have to do. Yeah. You got to do this, and then you got to do this, you got to do this, and I hate that. Like that is just not my jam. And so, but this Dark Depths thing, the way it's kind of set up is you can kind of you're essentially just creating like a little sandbox of mystery, right? So there are different types of bits of information that the players can acquire, and then once they've acquired it, they can move on to the next like layer of the mystery, right? But those different bits of information, you can kind of pepper them, like you can kind of like airdrop them into any part of the scenario. So essentially what we ended up with was a situation where the players, after we kind of established their relationship with each other, I just said, okay, well, where do you want to start? Like where would you begin your investigation? And someone said, well, maybe we go check out like the newspaper archives, because that's where a lot of these like supernatural occurrences were being reported. So we did that, and that gave me an opportunity. I had like a list of things I could possibly drop in there, and I did, and they found one. It was good. It was a kind of like a little sandbox mystery. There was no way they could not get to the end, essentially, because they had to just like find X numbers of clues, and then you just propel them forward towards the conclusion. Yeah. Everyone at the table seemed to like it a lot. It is the first Cthulhu-related product I've ever been happy with, because if anybody who's ever listened to episode 0 knows that I've been through all of them, role-playing game, board game, or otherwise, and I've always hated them, and I really, really like this. So this was the kind of Cthulhu mystery that is right for the style of GMing I do, which is more of an improvisational style. So I liked it a lot.
I should have trusted my instincts and gone with the same, because as I mentioned, the Apocalypse World stuff is basically built for me. Of players, and
of course, absolutely. Well,
I look forward to giving it another go.
Lessons learned. I mean,
but at least now we know. Stay the hell away from modules. Cthulhu Dark doesn't save horror modules.
I wouldn't even say that I know that for sure, because I went with such a weird one that requires too much fiddling with.
I don't know.
I would tentatively agree with you.
We definitely had two ends of the spectrum, right? Like you went with the very, very ornate, like bizarre module that is not traditional in any sense of the word, and I went with not a module at all, but it was incredibly traditional, and like so.
Well, I've run a very traditional module in Trail and thought it sucked too.
Well, okay. Well, why don't we take a little break and then we'll go into the main topic?
Sounds good.
So our main topic today is called Powered by the Apocalypse. This topic came up because last week, if you listened to our show, a lot of the games that were on our lists were games that we were calling PBTA, or Powered by the Apocalypse. It seemed like a good natural follow-up to kind of do a little bit more of a deeper dive on what that means. In short, Powered by the Apocalypse just means games that are based off of Vincent Baker's Apocalypse World engine, but it's kind of become a lot more than that. And I think that might be fun to talk about, like sort of how a lot of game designers have kind of expanded on his original ideas. I would say roughly half of all new indie role-playing games coming out now are powered by the Apocalypse. Is that a correct deduction? Because it feels like it. Yeah, it feels like it. But it's good. I love it. It's a great system. I haven't played. There's so many different PBTA games. I've only played a fraction of them. I have really enjoyed the ones I played, and so I thought it'd be fun to go just kind of do a little bit of an overview of what makes a PBTA game, like what are the elements they all kind of share, how do they compare to traditional role-playing games, and that sort of thing. So I think we should just dive right in.
The fiction triggering the moves.
Right.
Fiction comes before that. I think it's we're sort of stating it, but it's actually one of my favorite, and I think one of the most important bits about Apocalypse World. It's not a new thing, of course. I'm sure there are D&D games where dude doesn't pick up a D20 until he says, well, okay, I'm swinging my sword at his knees or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
I haven't played in those games. But I think it's basically you're prohibited from doing the board player thing of grabbing dice and rolling.
Right, yeah.
Until you contribute to the fiction.
And I love that.
Yeah.
It's
love
the
that
best.
so much.
Yeah, it's the best. I mean, I would say that it doesn't sound particularly like innovative or groundbreaking, but it kind of is in a lot of ways as far as role playing games go. Yeah. I came up on second edition. I was raised on second edition. That was what I played when I was a kid, and I distinctly remember that it was about I go up and I hit the guy, or I'm rolling my attack. Like if it was a player's turn in the initiative order, you just straight up rolled your D20. You didn't even say what you were doing. You just rolled your D20 because it was assumed you were going to hit that thing, right? Like there was no discussion about what your character's actually doing, right? And there was certainly no like after it was over, like someone saying like, well, why don't you go ahead and describe that for us? Like, tell us how that looks on screen.
That happened, and it was always awful, right? Because it was always like this overwrought explanation. Oh, I stabbed my sword into his spine and twist it. But the end result is like, okay, he has 5 less hit points.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the fiction never really changes beyond numbers on a page going down.
That's true. That's a good point.
When I first started playing 4th edition D&D, I tried to be that guy, so I'd be like, okay, so I'm going to go up to him and I'm going to try and sneak behind him a little bit, and then I'm going to stab him in the back, roll the dice, and that lasted for like 5 rounds of just me being the person talking,
right.
And then we spend 20 minutes of everybody else just rolling dice
while everyone else is like, bro, we're waiting for our turn in the initiative order. Could you speed it up?
You were that guy. No, but like I think it's one of the most interesting and innovative things that Apocalypse World brought to the table, which is it's codified this notion of you must, like, I think it's even says so. It's somewhere in the rules, and all of them it says, to do the thing, you have to do the thing, right? Like you've got to, or something like that. I don't remember how it's phrased exactly, but it's something like that, right?
To do it, do it.
To do it, do it, right? Yeah, which is kind of it sounds like it's a pithy way of saying.
I hate that, but like what it is trying to mean.
Yeah. No, it's super trite, but it kind of gets to the point of it, which is you don't engage the mechanics at all until you have explained how your character, like if you're angling to manipulate someone, or if you're angling to want to be able to take a pot shot at this guy or whatever, you've got to give us some fiction. You have to say what your character is doing at the table. You have to describe that, and then it's up to the MC or the collective will of the table to say, yes, now you've engaged that move. Like, go ahead and roll, seize by force or whatever the name of the move is.
What's the advantage of even having the moves? Is it just guiding the narration? Is it guiding the fiction?
That's an incredibly interesting and philosophical question, Dan. Do you have any thoughts on that? That question sounds loaded. Okay, you're throwing it out there. Okay, all right. What do you think, Steve?
So, not just, but yes, that's part of it. But I think it also adds a lot of diversification amongst the different characters playing.
That's true. Yeah,
and it's also the cool psychological thing of you're staring at a sheet in front of you,
right?
And in some games, you're basically just staring at a bunch of numbers.
Right.
But this one, you're staring at a phrase, because every move involves a phrase. When such and such happens, then you do so and so.
Right.
And so you're staring at this really cool thing that you're just kind of waiting for you to be able to do. And if it's on your playbook, it's also a really cool thing that only you can do.
Right.
That's true.
So you've got.
So you want to go do the thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's why I say it's like that's what when I say the moves are kind of signposts. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like they are directions for how to play the fiction. Right. They're basically role playing cues essentially. Like this is if I want to engage this cool thing on my paper, like you said, I've got to do that little phrase. I've got to do that thing. Right. But
I do think that the idea that that's roping it off and saying I'm the only one who does this is probably very important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it can also
You've convinced me. Moves are
right.
A-okay.
Moves are A-okay. Although, but in fact, World of Dungeons has proved you don't actually need them. So,
and it's also signposts for the MC or the GM or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like the Gunlugger in Apocalypse World, which is, the gun-toting badass.
Right. Yeah.
Like the MC can look at the Gunlugger's playbook, the Gunlugger's character sheet, and see that the Gunlugger, long story short, is more or less a gargantuan badass in large fights.
Right.
And so it's not just there's a move that's only triggered when you're in a battle, not just like a one-on-one.
A one-on-one, like,
so
an all-out battle. Yeah, that's okay. That's a good point. Yeah,
So it's a cue for the MC
right.
to bring things into the fiction.
You know, I've never thought about it that way, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think I was probably always just doing it sort of just instinctually and not really thinking about it that way. But you're right. That's what it is.
Well, Monsterhearts specifically, like in the GM instructions, say they have information about each move. That's like if this skin picks this move, then they're signaling to you that they want to do this, story.
Right? Yeah. No, that's a good point. That is a very good point. And that's a good way of thinking about the player moves. I mean, I think I've always, just so the listeners know, whenever I play these games, I'm almost always the MC or the GM. Mm-hmm. Like I very rarely get to play them, which is fine because this is one of those rare games. We can talk about this in a minute. PBTA games are one of those rare games that are fun to GM. Okay, because most games are not fun to GM. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I hate Pathfinder, for example, is like indentured servitude. It is fucking miserable. GMing Pathfinder was a miserable, horrible experience. Pathfinder Society is even worse. It's like a goddamn job, and people have expectations. Like, and if you don't do it the way you're supposed to do it according to the ancient bylaws of Pathfinder Society, like they're gonna report you. Like that is bullshit. So that's a whole separate conversation. PBTA games, however, are very fun to GM. So playing and GMing them are fun. Totally lost my train of thought there. I don't know where I was going with that. But no, yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Like this idea that the moves also tell the GM, hey, this is what this player is interested in doing. And that's how you plan. You should accordingly like throw things in their way that engage those things. I've never thought about it in those terms because I think I just naturally pick up on that. Like, that's what that guy does. So let's make that happen, right? But in terms of thinking about them in terms of like it's like planning tools almost. Like that's a cool idea.
It's a nice thing to deliberately go to. If
that's good.
If you're low on ideas.
Well, so the GM has moves as well. Different though, I think. Like the purpose is different. Mechanically they're definitely different. They don't trigger die rolls, for example. The GM never rolls dice. The GM moves, my interpretation of the GM moves is they are simply codifications of what the GM should be doing anyway. Does that make sense?
It does. I've encountered a lot of people in discussions about Apocalypse World. On the one side, there's a bunch of people more or less like me who are like, it's the best thing ever. It's really innovative. And then the other side, there are people who are basically saying it just sort of codifies.
I've been doing that anyway.
Yeah. But I like that in Apocalypse World, the GM moves, as you said, you don't roll dice.
Right.
I'm sure there's asterisk.
No, there's none. Like, well, I roll dice.
I roll dice on
the. I don't know that players do it in Dungeon World.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's an explicit rule. The players do it.
Okay.
I roll on the treasure table. That's it. And that's even before the adventure. That's not even during, for Dungeon World anyway. Yeah, but there's a treasure table. Yeah.
But I like that it basically makes explicit the things you can do.
Yeah.
If you fail a roll and suddenly the goblins that were behind you are grabbing your arms and dragging you off into the shadows, I can totally do that. If that happened in D&D, I'd stare daggers at you.
Yeah. But you're right. No, like in the PBTA games, that's a move that you can do. Like it's called separate them. They all have that. The separate the players or whatever move, and it's a good one.
I think I've lost more equipment in the games of Dungeon World that I've played than in years of playing D&D. Because if you fuck with my +2 rapier, that's off limits. But,
well, one of the MC or GM moves in Dungeon World is make them lose their equipment,
separate them from their stuff. Or
like make them lose their stuff or whatever. And especially in the early days when I was running a Dungeon World, like before I kind of like started to have like all the moves memorized and kind of had like a sort of internal vocabulary of like how to sort of do things. I was doing that move a lot. I was doing the you lose your equipment move. Sorry, buddy. It's kind of an easy one to do. But I've gotten a lot better, I think, in the ensuing months and months.
Well, I think going back to talking about how it doesn't really matter so much if you succeed or not in all of your rolls.
That's true too.
Makes that a little less of a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, absolutely. Too, yeah. So. Well, so like just to kind of get back on track, it is kind of a sort of codification of what people kind of generally do anyway, or what a good GM or even a moderately talented GM should be doing. Just as I think it's helpful to have an example here, and something that a lot of people understand is the sort of dungeon scenario, right? In Dungeon World, the GM moves are make them lose their equipment, separate them, announce future badness, right? Like that's a really good one. whereby, if they fail their roll or if they get the 7 to 9 result, you can make a move and say, oh, well, you hear heavy footsteps around the corner, right? Give them something to think about. Also, very explicitly, moves are having the monsters hit them is a move, right? Like, or having the monster do their thing. The GM can just do these things, right? But what kind of the sort of side effect is, by making it explicit in the rules, like these are things a GM can do on certain die results, it makes it feel fair to everybody, right? Or you can always say, like, look, I'm just, like, I've never had anybody get all like up in my face about it. It's a good, again, it's kind of a reminder of like, hey, this is how you run this game, right? Like these are the things you should be thinking about, and that kind of thing. So
one of the big principles that I often see quoted places is the be a fan of the characters.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's the best one, right? Because that is another one of those, like, we've all had that trad GM or that trad DM who is like the TPK dick, right? Like all he wants to do, he just wants to kill everybody. He wants to kill everybody, or
how else is he going to win?
Exactly. He wants to kill you, or even worse, he is completely indifferent to whether you proceed or not, right? Like I hate those GMs like that, right? Those are the worst, right? What does it mean to you, Dan, when the agenda says like, be a fan of the players? Like, how do you...
Well, I think exactly that. Like, right, your goal is not, as the GM, you're not opposed to the characters. You're there to facilitate them being badasses.
Right,
You're not there to actually, like, really be an obstacle that they're not supposed to get past.
Right,
You're there to give them situations they can shine in.
Right, no, that's great. Well, and I think one of the principles in Dungeon World is fill their lives with danger, right? Like that's very different from what some DMs do in Dungeons and Dragons, which is like try to kill them.
Right.
Use every tool at your disposal to kill them, right? Like filling their lives with danger implies like it's danger they can survive, that they will have lives, right?
Yeah.
They will have lives to fill with danger, right? That there's adventure, right?
Not end their lives with danger.
Exactly. Yeah. Like fill their very short life with immediate
very terminal
danger. Right. Yeah. I love that about PBTA. This idea that, and I don't know if is that all the PBTA games, the whole like being a fan of the characters, or is that just Dungeon World?
I think that's one I've seen carried over a lot, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something I think it's taken
because
up.
I can't think of a game that's not applicable to. Really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it is a perfect expression of the GM's role, right? Mm-hmm. The GM's role is not to be adversarial. The GM's role is to facilitate fun, and I think being a fan of the characters is part of that. Like, you want to see them. You want to see them succeed, but to see them succeed, it's not going to be interesting unless they were challenged, right? So it's like challenging them to succeed. Right. I think that's a quite profound thing to like have in the book, to my mind.
And I think sort of, I don't want to say tangentially, but connected to be a fan of the players is also that you as the GM, the MC, are making a story collaboratively, but it's about the characters. It's not just going to be the list of things I have prepared.
Right.
And then, sure, I like these characters so long as they go through the things I have prepared for them.
Or even worse, I have this like NPC that I'm really in love with.
I was just thinking that. I'd never really considered it before, but as a GM who can't make your own moves, it makes it much harder to justify having an NPC who's actually doing the adventure with the PCs following along behind them.
Exactly. Well,
you can't insert Gandalf into your fiction.
Yep, it's true. I mean, I will fess up to, in my fantasy campaigns at least, I have like, these sort of like big iconic world type characters, that like kind of like 13th Age has their little icons or whatever. I have those characters in my game world, but they don't appear on screen, right? They're just a thing in the background, right? And so I don't think that's quite as like abusive of this like favorite NPCs.
You're not all adventuring with Raistlin,
right? Yeah. No. Okay. So just kind of picking up on that point, Apocalypse World and Monsterhearts explicitly have like they tell the GM, one of the principles or agendas or whatever is the NPCs are made of paper, right? The NPCs are disposable. That's really important.
I think Monsterhearts, I don't think it's phrased this way in the agendas or moves. Maybe it is actually, but it's like drive your NPCs like a stolen car.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to this idea of being a fan of the players. When we tune in, to Teen Wolf, like I know you guys do,
every week.
We're tuning into Teen Wolf because we want to see unusually hairless werewolves taking a shower and being sexy on one another and doing that. We're not tuning into Teen Wolf to like learn about the life of their teacher, right? Or the
Right.
or the custodian at the high school, right? Like we don't care about those people. They're set dressing, right? Set dressing for the main show of beautiful, beautiful hairless werewolves.
I got to get on this team wolf apparently.
No, I mean, yeah, like you're not turning on the show because you want to watch like the NPCs. Like you are sitting down at the table because you want to see because the main characters of the PCs, you want to see them be awesome, and it's the GM's job to sort of facilitate that. And it is surprisingly fun. It is fun to engage the players in that way and not just tell your own story.
And tying into that, I get agendas and principles confused, so I don't know which is which.
Yeah, I kind of use them interchangeably.
Yeah. But one that, at least the concept is in... Oh, okay, I've heard it phrased different ways. Play to find out what happens.
Right.
That's Apocalypse World's phrasing.
Yes.
And then I think keep the story feral is Monsterhearts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's...
What does that mean to you?
That's basically where you as the GM, and the players as well, you may go in with agendas or with characters in mind that have agendas.
Right.
But you don't have, after about 45 minutes, I expect them to get to this scene. You don't have things planned out, and you get excitement and enjoyment from the thing the game facilitates, which is basically creating collaboratively a story where none of you know exactly where it's going to go.
Most of the time, even you're picking your name from a menu.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Oh, absolutely.
People hate that sometimes. I love it. Like I love it because
I know it's the best.
Listeners will not know this about me, but people who game with me know I'm very particular about character names. I'm so damn particular about character names, and I love the PBTA process because all those names have been carefully thought of, and they fit, and they sound great, and they cannot be influenced by player stupidity.
You can't come up with some bullshit like the Amazing Larry in your fantasy game.
I actually quite liked the Amazing Larry. I thought that was a good one. I don't know who thought of that one, but it was a good one.
That's not a bullshit example. This happened.
No, that is actually
that's on the menu though, isn't it? That's on the menu.
It is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's on the menu.
I picked that off a menu.
Yeah. I liked the Amazing Larry. I know you don't think I did, but I did.
One of my favorites is something like, you have watched this character sleeping. Get a straight.
Yeah, I love it. But I love Monsterhearts for that reason. It's so good. Like, Monsterhearts just does not care about how creepy it is, which is why Twilight is not a terrific comparison.
Twilight doesn't understand how creepy it is.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I like that. That's good. So, Steve, you wanted to talk about experience in the PBTA games.
Yes. Experience isn't just something you accumulate forever and ever like it frequently is in games.
Right.
It's maybe closer to like the storyteller games. And I'm sure there are other examples, but you get a certain amount of experience and then you don't quite spend it in Apocalypse World games typically. You usually just hit a threshold, reset to 0, and then you
go up a level.
instantly get a thing, or I think you have to make camp and sleep or whatever in Dungeon World to get the thing, but whatever.
But it's a very D&D type system of
yeah.
you hit the threshold and then you level and blah, blah,
Right.
blah. Yeah.
Right.
But in Apocalypse World, in particular, once you hit 5 experience points, then, like I said, it resets to 0. You instantly, right then, get an advance, is what they call it.
Yes.
And an advance is a discrete, small little packet of what might be leveling up in Dungeons & Dragons. It's a thing. It's frequently a move. Sometimes it's a stat bump.
Right.
Sometimes it's something a little more fictional, like you have a gang now. There's people who follow your orders, that sort of thing. And I think the way experience works in Apocalypse World is very important because it's something for you as the player to pursue.
Right.
And in pursuing it, you're not just on the hamster wheel. You'll get a little pellet too.
Right.
You get a reward. And so basically, how you get experience is typically in Apocalypse World by highlighted stats.
Right.
So at the start of each session, and it will change from session to session. Start of each session, you will take your playbook, your character sheet, pass it to one other player, and also the MC. Each of them picks one of your 5 stats and highlights it. Each stat is tied to 1 or 2 basic moves, and then often enough playbook moves that are specific to you.
Yeah.
So every time in the session that you pick up the dice and you make a move that involves one of those highlighted stats, you get XP.
Right.
I actually like Monsterhearts version of this because it's like once per scene per stat, I think. So it doesn't get crazy.
But yeah, for sure.
but they work more or less the same. And what this means for the game, and it didn't really become clear to me until I was like, in the back of the book, Vincent Baker mentions his inspirations.
Right.
And the inspiration for the way XP works, and the way highlighting, I should say, works, is fan mail from Primetime Adventures.
Right.
Which we mentioned last session. Fan mail is I like that thing you did, other player, here's a reward.
Right.
And so another player highlighting in your Apocalypse World game a stat for you, and the MC highlighting a stat for you, that's basically them telling you, this is the cool thing I want you to do this session.
Right.
And it's not always going to be the thing you're good at. If you're the ass-kicky gunlugger, it's not always going to be your stat hard, which is what you are going to be rolling all the time.
Right, yeah.
Like, in a game I ran, we liked to highlight the -2 hot for our gunlugger, because it was so antithetical to his character, and therefore when he brought it up in the session in order to get XP, it was usually really interesting and frequently pathetic, but it was always it felt rewarding,
right? Yeah,
because I'm giving you your little hamster pellet and good job,
right? Yeah,
and this is where I think Dungeon World fails.
Okay,
because Dungeon World removes that, but Dungeon World replaces how you get XP. Replaces highlighting, in other words, with on a 6-.
If you fail your roll,
yeah.
Right.
If you fail your roll,
you get a 6-,
you get XP.
Right. So before I dive into the Dungeon World, the defensive Dungeon World here, and I'll reframe what you're saying, because I know where you're going with this. I just want to say that our example is Monsterhearts. We've been playing that recently, and we've played that a lot more than Apocalypse World. As far as the more traditional powered by the Apocalypse games, that sounds terrible. That's a terrible thing to say. But we've played Monsterhearts a lot more than Apocalypse World. And I do like that. Like you do in the beginning, you highlight those 2 stats. So if I want to see the werewolf be sexy, the werewolf might be good at sexy because he's a werewolf, especially if he's a hairless werewolf, a beautiful, beautiful hairless werewolf that takes showers with other hairless werewolves. I can highlight the werewolf's, hot stat or is it hot or whatever it's called? Yeah, hot. And then that gives him an incentive to do to do sexy time in the game, right? To be hot in the game. That's terrific. I love it. I just wanted to use an example of like how, just to kind of just so listeners really, really clearly understand how it works. Like I'm highlighting the stat on you because I want to see you behave in that way, right? I'd like to see your character behave in this way, and so your incentive to behave in that way is you're only going to get experience if you behave in that way, right? Or it's one of the ways you're going to get experience in a Monsterheart. There's actually lots of ways you can get experience in Monsterheart.
It's still the primary.
It's the primary. It's the main one, right? Well, spending the string is a good one too, where you spend the string to give them an experience point for doing what you want. It's the same idea though, right? You're getting an experience point for behaving in a way that I want to see,
and that's a much more like laser focused thing too.
Right.
So it's not just like at some point be sexy.
Right.
It's very much like do this specific thing right now.
True.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The spending the string to give them an XP thing. Right.
But it's not just focus. The string is the string is my character wants your character.
Exactly.
To do
Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah. Exactly. Because the string, when you spend the string, and again, just to refresh, the string represents your emotional power over that person. When you're spending it, you're supposed to give a little bit of narrative or a little bit of narration about what that means in the fiction. Right. Like by spending this string, I'm tapping on the fact that I know this dirty secret about you or whatever, right? So, exactly. Now, the Dungeon World thing, just to say it again, in Dungeon World, there is not an incentive to behave in a certain way. Experience is not directly tied to how your character behaves. In fact, you get experience when you get a 6-. Whenever you get a 6-, which normally means you failed at whatever you're trying to do, you get to mark an experience point. I think what's worth pointing out here is these are just 2 different conversations. The only thing that it's called experience, and in Apocalypse World, Monsterhearts is called experience, and that's kind of the only thing they share. Like, it probably isn't even helpful to call them the same thing because they don't function in the same way. The reason why I think it's okay in Dungeon World, why it doesn't bother me that the experience reward is not tied to like your character behaving in a certain way, is because Dungeon World comes from Dungeons and Dragons. It is explicitly Dungeons and Dragons, but with this different system of rules, right? In Dungeons and Dragons, the point of experience, it is a reflection of your character's martial skill, their prowess, their ability to kill monsters, their ability to plumb the depths. It is supposed to be a reflection of their training, their and that training represents their advancement in their chosen profession, right?
Yeah.
And so they're doing two different things. In Monsterhearts and Apocalypse World, the point of the experience is, and the point of the game is to have these interactions with the characters, right? To watch these characters be sexy, cool teenage monsters, or to watch them be people like, hard scrabbling it out in a post-apocalyptic setting. In Dungeon World, we're just trying to watch the characters do cool shit. It is much more traditional in the sense that I'm just trying to level up my characters so they can get new spells and new things, right?
Yeah.
So it's a much more like traditional treatment of goals, I guess. And it is the traditional goal of level progression, right? Like it's even called levels. Like you're level 1, you're level 2, you're level 3, right? It's level progression versus what Apocalypse World and Monsterhearts are trying to do. And so I think it's two separate things, and I'm not sure it's helpful to compare them, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, here's the thing though. I mean, Apocalypse World and Monsterhearts, you're still progressing. When you earn XP, regardless of how you earn it,
Right.
Once you hit a threshold, reverts to 0, you get a thing.
Right, yeah. But going back to the Ludovic's whatever that thing we've mentioned a few times which might get edited out. How is my behaving like a sexy, hot, hairless werewolf sexing up the witch? How does that translate to me getting to add 1 to my volatile? Or, does that make sense?
You mean like after you take an advance?
Yeah. Like there's not much. There's a much more direct connection between like how you get experience in Dungeon World, like the in fiction stuff, and what it ultimately leads to, right? Because in Dungeon World, it's a representation of I'm getting better at my stuff because I'm learning by failure, right?
Yeah.
Like I just took a swing at this. I just tried to run underneath this ogre's club, and I got clipped on the forehead. Next time I'll know to duck faster, right? Or what you see what I'm saying? Like there's a much more direct connection, like in the fictional circumstances that caused me to get experience in Dungeon World, which leads to like my professional advancement in my class than there is in the other games.
But the other games are a more story game concern with the XP. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not your character necessarily getting better because of the similar things they do, whatever.
Right? Yeah. They're not like
Right.
It's not a class. It's not their training. It's not their profession. Yeah.
It's a metagame reward to you, the player, for
Right, yeah.
doing things for entertaining the other players.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm getting at. In Dungeon World, it's not a metagame thing. It's just not.
Right.
It's just not a meta thing.
I'm saying they threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Oh, so you're saying they didn't have to do that, right?
Right.
Well, okay. So I think I will say that in play, it doesn't matter. Like it means almost nothing in play. Like in play, everything at the table that's happening is exciting and adventurous, and people are jumping around and getting hit and doing all the things they're supposed to be doing as adventurers. And there's never a moment where, unless it's just a player who's naturally inclined to like have freeze ups and mental blocks. Otherwise, everyone is ready to jump in there and do their thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure like that. There's even like I'm not sure that. I think maybe like the genre takes care of the motivation, everyone knows how to be a fantasy adventurer, right? Everyone knows what they're supposed to do when they're the fighter or the wizard or the cleric, and so I'm not sure that reward system is. Like, it kind of goes to bonds. The bonds are supposed to be theoretically doing this, right? The bonds are supposed to be like, you're supposed to be engaging with the bonds thing so that you can have more of that, like, story game feel. But it's awkward. It's super awkward. It doesn't fit.
Yeah, you're actually sort of bringing me around. I just sort of think it ties in with another thing I don't like about that sort of fantasy, not necessarily. But it's basically, I probably don't give a shit about that dude's character.
Yeah, it's probably just it just might not be your jam, and that's okay.
Yeah,
I mean, like
but I mean, because I don't give a shit about that dude's character.
Yeah,
I probably don't care so much about whether or not we get to see his flaws. In other words, if I might normally highlight his extremely low dump stat charisma,
right? Yeah,
because I would find it interesting in a game like Monsterhearts or Apocalypse World.
Yeah,
I probably don't care that much in the adventure game.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just what it comes down to. Going back to this idea of like. Dungeon World is very popular. Dungeon World is also kind of its own thing at this point. It's become its own thing by almost like as a necessity, like it's unavoidably so, because it is proudly embraces like the roots of the hobby, right? Which is traditional fantasy style adventure gaming, right? And it's embraced that. It is not a game that concerns itself much with this sort of like emotional things that are involved in Monsterhearts.
You don't use Dungeon World to play Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even that, like those sorts of things, like don't like the Game of Thrones-esque like low fantasy political machinations or leverage. those things don't even work well in Dungeon World. Like,
Yeah.
they don't work well. Dungeon World is very finely tuned to do one thing.
In the way in which they don't work well in Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. I speak from experience.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a way, yeah. I guess. Well, I mean, you just hand wave all that stuff in those games, right? Like, there's no mechanical like implications for playing the game that way in those games. But Dungeon World like really like hits that like dungeon crawl thing, and so that's either your jam or it's not your jam. And if it's your jam, I think you kind of like, I love the way you get XP in Dungeon World because
but it does incentivize to some degree doing things you're shitty at, right?
Except, here's why it doesn't incentivize those things. I've never ever at the table had anybody say, "Oh man, I hope I miss this roll so I can get an experience point." That has never happened once that I know of. At least if they're saying that, they're saying it to themselves secretly because they don't want to. Like, they do not want to hit a 6. They don't.
Counterexample. When I was most recently in Austin, I met a guy who had 2 dice that he called his Dungeon World dice,
right?
Because they roll terribly and they get him XP.
But doesn't that sound like something someone would say who's never played the game?
He has played the game,
but like a lot. Like, when I hear people say things like that, that sounds like something that someone like. Maybe this is just my bias about like how people interact online and how people like say they are into things or not into things. But it sounds like something that someone says, like, I read that somewhere, like that's a thing I read somewhere. And so I'm kind of making that part of my inner vocabulary. These are my Dungeon World dice, right? Like, in play, having played numerous sessions of this game, that has never happened once at the table that I can think of. That has never happened where someone's been like, "Oh, I hope I missed this roll," because when you miss the roll, you're getting fucked in some way, or some bad shit's going to happen, right? Like, if I miss the roll, I'm inviting the GM to make a move. That move often involves adding more monsters. It often involves hurting me and knocking off a third of my hit points. It involves lots of things that are not good, and so it's not worth like. The incentive is to do well, but I still like it. I love the experience system because it seems more intuitive to me in terms of like how your characters are getting better. They're getting better by failing. They're getting better by doing things and that they do poorly at. They fail, and we abstract that to think, oh, they're learning and getting better, right? Whereas in second ed, which is what I played a lot of in second edition Dungeons and Dragons, you get better by being awesome, right? Like, you get better by being awesome. I am awesome. I killed this thing. I'm so awesome. I'm going to get more awesome, right? Look at this awesome thing I did. It's going to cause me to be even more awesome. That's not how real life works, right? You don't get better at something by continuing to be awesome at it. Like, so I just like I like it in principle. Like, I like the sort of the thinking that like this is you're getting better by challenging yourself or by doing things that you were poor at, right?
So here's my follow-up objection.
Sure.
So if it doesn't incentivize rolling the things you're worst at,
right?
Best case scenario, it incentivizes nothing, and that is a missed opportunity.
It's not well. So but again, like, I think it's helpful to separate it from. I don't think it's supposed to incentivize anything. It's just a way of keeping track of your character getting better or not.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, maybe. I guess. I mean, maybe it never comes up that like the characters aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, like, I don't know what else like I would want from the system. Like, I could probably run the game to where like it was more about like interpersonal interactions or something.
Yeah, that's not really necessarily what I'm saying.
But what you're saying is like it was a chance for like the designers to have the experience do something that motivates the players to behave in a certain way. I get that. I guess I'm viewing it as something. I'm viewing it just in a more traditional lens, which is that traditional lens of like, this is just a way of like keeping track of how good our characters are or are not doing. It's just a way of determining whether they like, when are they going to level. Like, it's a real traditional way of viewing it, and I think it's okay for Dungeon World because Dungeon World is explicitly.
So is there any advantage to doing that rather than just saying at the end of the session everybody levels?
Yeah,
I suppose not.
Why is that not superior?
Well, I suppose not. But my counter to that is this: there are lots of things in Dungeon World that they could hand wave away like that, right? The designers of Dungeon World did a very smart thing, and it's the reason why Dungeon World is so popular. They did a very, very smart thing by including all of those little buzzy things that traditional role players know, right? Role players know strength and dexterity and constitution and intelligence.
Yeah.
They could have wrapped that up in 3 stats probably, right? Mental, physical, or whatever, right? But they didn't. They chose to use the 6 traditional stats, and it works fine. Wisdom and intelligence is a little wonky and weird, but it always has been, right? It's like when do you use wisdom and when do you use intelligence? That's always been strange.
It's authentically stupid.
It's exactly. Yeah. Like they chose to do that. They chose to have the phrase level 1, level 2. They chose they chose. There's money, there's coins, right? Like there's like none of the PBTA games don't have money. You don't keep track of money, right? But in Dungeon World you do.
Like, in fairness, you keep track of very abstract hunks of money.
Yeah. It's super abstract, right? Yeah. Super abstract. So Sage and Adam made a lot of like very purposeful design decisions, which were meant to like expose more traditional role players to these concepts, and in that regard, they were very successful. So yeah, of course you could just say, hey, at the end of the session, you're at level 2. Of course you could do that. I know that. We all know that. You could totally do that. But they're speaking the language of traditional gamers with that, and I think that was a very wise move on their part. I mean,
but they also diverged from tradition in that your gaining of XP is essentially random.
Well, yeah, if you fail, right? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it did a thing that I like. I mean, I'm glad they diverged from that. It was weird at first. At first, I was like, oh, it seems so odd that you. Like everyone always says at first, like, oh, it's so strange that I don't get experience for doing better, because in video games and in regular role-playing games, that's how you get your experience, is by killing shit, right? You kill shit and you get the XP value, right? And the challenge rating, and you get all your XP appropriate or whatever, right? That's always a weird thing at first, but until I take a moment to explain to the players like why they went with the failure route, and then again, it's I don't know, I think it's fine. It's random, but it's not. Again, it's an abstraction of like these characters improving their skills and getting better. It's just an abstraction, so. It's not.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's the players don't have control over it because it's random.
Right. That's fine. I think that's fine.
This doesn't all emerge from a bad experience, but I played Dungeon World once where we rolled a ton. It was a very, very active session.
Sure, yeah.
I think it was probably about 20 rolls.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
3 of those were successes. Mm-hmm. 3 of those were failures.
Right.
14 of those, I didn't get what I wanted. I didn't get XP.
Right, yeah.
Totally random. Everybody else a level ahead of me.
Well, I hope you had a good time, though, right? Like, if you didn't have a good time, that's a different problem, right? We can be in the weeds with this forever, but ultimately, like, I always go back to play at the table and like how the experience goes at the table. And the one thing I know to be true is that when I run Dungeon World, at least, everyone has a good time.
Well, I would say on the other side of that argument that I'm not entirely sure that XP is even a good thing in something like Monsterhearts. Like, why does my werewolf need to get better?
Yeah, you can make some of the same arguments just for Monsterhearts.
In a lot of cases, like, I don't want to roll my highlighted stat because that's less interesting in the fiction. But I mean, it would give me a reward, so it's always very tempting to put the fiction second in order to actually like just roll that highlighted stat. So I would argue that you should probably not even have XP in Monsterhearts and just. This is your character. I mean, there's plenty of games where you don't advance, and they're fine.
I tend to agree. Like, a lot of the newer PBTA games don't have it at all, right? Like,
really?
Many of them do. Yeah, well, a lot of the more, like, avant-garde, non-traditional PBTA games. This is terrible. I hate this conversation. A lot of the...
You've probably never heard of them.
Yeah, a lot of the more, like... new wave.
Your horn rings are slipping a little bit.
The new wave PBTA games. Oh, this is terrible. A lot of those games are dispensing with the idea of like I get experience and I level up, right? Like Ghostlines doesn't have it. I don't think the Warren doesn't have it.
Ghostlines does.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't. Well, it isn't. Yeah, I guess it does.
But you get it by like I've gone on X number of runs.
Oh, right.
Basically.
Yeah.
So it's not you're not getting it for doing things. You're getting it for showing up. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the Dungeon World reward, right? It's an expression of my character's training and advancement, right? The Warren, I don't think has anything like that. They just die, right?
I think so. Yeah. I don't think they live long enough to get better.
Yeah.
They just get worse until they
then die. Yeah. Like I you're right. Like I don't know if this has really come up in play much because I don't think we've played enough to figure it out. Like I know what I know about Dungeon World because I've played it a lot, but in Monsterhearts I haven't played enough to figure this out yet. But I think you might be right. Like there might be a thing going on where it's like I have these two stats highlighted, but it's not really what I want to do. Or it's not. Or it's not.
Yeah, I've definitely been in situations.
Okay, yeah. Well,
as
an MC, I don't have that experience. So is that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Where it'd be way cooler for the fiction if
I did this thing.
If I punch this guy in the face, but my cold stat is highlighted, so maybe I'll shut him down instead.
Right. Yeah.
I'll come at this in a strange direction that doesn't necessarily make sense, but will trigger the shut someone down move instead of the lash out physically move.
Right.
So
I wonder how much of this has to do with the fact that like. I think the reason why that might be unsatisfying to you, Dan, is because you're a very good role player and you've done this a lot, and you know what makes a good story, right? Like I think those of us
You graduated.
yes,
Thanks, Dad.
Use your judgment on the editing of that part. So no, whatever. So everyone knows I love them, like the benevolent patriarchal dictator.
You
that
love
I
them
am
like
of
the
gauntlet.
toe-headed rascals they
Yes,
are.
I know. No, so like I don't even know where I was going. Oh, so maybe the fact that like I think if you're an experienced role player and you have a good sense of what's good to do in the fiction right now, like what would make this story interesting, you may not need those mechanical incentives to do that thing, right?
Yeah.
So it could be a situation of like, okay, this game designer thought, I'm going to have this mechanical incentive to do cool shit because people may not be accustomed to doing that. They may need the mechanical incentive to do cool shit. It could just be we're super evolved and we don't need the incentive to do the cool shit, right? Is that
That's
possible?
cool.
Is that
dig
possible?
that hole deeper. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's possible. That could be what's going
I'll
on there.
accept the argument that I'm so awesome is why this mechanic is
Well,
satisfying.
what I'm saying is like maybe those kind of getting to what you were saying is maybe we don't need them,
Sure, yeah.
right?
I can see that actually, because I'm a fan of what I've seen come out of them in play in like Apocalypse World, but if it were replaced with just the straight up Primetime Adventures fan mail, I don't think I'd be crying.
Which I think is better because then it's
You can do whatever you want.
yeah.
as long
You punch
as you
that
do
dude,
something
awesome, here you
cool,
go.
like it's rewarding afterward. It's
Yeah.
not trying to guide beforehand or
Right.
like funnel you down a certain path beforehand.
And I like advancement, so if you replace it with Primetime Adventures fan mail and it's been a session, you guys get a thing, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. I think maybe we've all come to an agreement.
All
Hooray.
right. Well, let's go design our game now. Let's go design our PBTA game.
Shall we wrap up then?
Let's
Sounds like
do
it.
that.
Let's wrap up. Okay. Well, that was our show. I hope you gained something from that riveting and extensive discussion of Powered by the Apocalypse games.
This may turn out to be a 20-minute podcast when I cut out all the stuff that I don't find interesting.
It
So
might be. Yeah, well, that's okay. We leave that in your capable hands.
It'll be
Padawan.
the games we played last week, and then that was our podcast. I hope you liked it.
So we're the Gauntlet. We can be found on Meetup. If you're in Houston, you want to come join us, just search in Meetups for role-playing games. We pop right up. We are also on Google+. You can also, again, just search for us and we'll pop right up. We also have an email address. It is gauntletpodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this discussion.
And we even have a webpage.
We do have a webpage. I don't know what it is, though.
It is gauntletpodcast.libsyn.com.
Libsyn is LYBSYN.com.
I thought it was LIBSYN.
It
Oh,
is
LIBSYN.com. Libsyn.com. So that was it. I'm Jason.
I'm Steve.
I'm Dan.
Thanks.